Hello, this is episode 13 of the Martial Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Jacobs, a martial artist, martial arts journalist, former contributing editor to Black Belt Magazine, and I tell stories about martial arts. We've got a special show today. We have two guests here. We may be joined by a third if we can iron out some technical difficulties with her, but they are all accomplished female martial artists who are going to discuss with me the subject of women in the martial arts. We have Geraldine Chisholm, a former colleague at Black Belt Magazine and Black Belt Hall of Fame member, who's an instructor in several different martial arts, including Arnis, Ninjutsu, and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. She's appeared on the TV show Knife or Death, demonstrating her skills with the Kukri blade, and she currently runs the Women's Martial Arts Network. And then we have Jody-Lynn Reicher, who joined the U.S. Marines out of high school and was among the first generation of female Marines who went through boot camp training specifically for combat missions. She's also a record-setting ultra-marathon runner who took up mixed martial arts later in life, competing in a number of amateur and professional matches, and has taught women's self-defense classes to various organizations. So I welcome you all both to the Martial Podcast.
Thank you
And
for having us.
Jody.
Jerry, how did you become involved in martial arts?
So most children get a chance to do a lot of great things in the martial arts. So for me, I started as a response to bullying as a child. I had an older brother who was a judo teacher, and he really got tired of seeing me coming home crying for kids picking on me and all that sort of thing. And so I trained in judo at the local Y under Sensei John Sabata. And I had a chance to rectify some of those bad kids with my judo. So that was really gratifying. And after its utility and application, I didn't feel like I needed it anymore. Life would go on, and then I would come across a guy who didn't take no for an answer. And it was a boyfriend I was dating. I had the domestic violence thing with my ex-husband. And by the time the second guy comes along, I'm like, you know what? I need some training. So I went to go get some firearms training. And then I realized that he could very well take my gun from me and use it. And I didn't want to develop a false sense of security with being having a firearm. And I decided that I really needed to train and find some training. So my first attempt was with a gentleman named Dan Stark out of Charlotte, North Carolina. He was a firearms and safety instructor, and I started with him, but the situation in Charlotte did not improve. So I really had to leave Charlotte and come to New York. And I ended up studying with who is known as the father of American Ninjutsu, Professor Ronald Duncan, O Sensei, the late Ronald Duncan, O Sensei. And I also trained with Professor Scott Stewart in the Vietnamese Jitsu system. And I've become my own kind of Shiro. Everything else, I had no plans. Life unfolded as it did, and sometimes our lives illuminate different stations in life, and it's just amazing to me what has happened since I've been training in the martial arts. It's just amazing.
Great.
So
Thank
that's
you.
short.
That's a lot, boy.
And Jody, I know you also had some experience with criminal violence in your background, and that was
Yeah.
how you got into martial arts as well, but then you ended up sticking with it to become a competitive fighter. How did
Yeah.
that come about?
Well, by the way, it's Reicher, not Riker.
Oh, I'm sorry. All these years
Just so
I've
you know.
known you, I thought it was Riker.
If it was my maiden name, I wouldn't have picked on it, but it's my husband's name, so I gotta say so. So anyway, yeah, I my husband way back a year after we were married in 84. He begged me to go and do karate with him. And I said, I can't do that. I just overcame this disastrous these double knee injuries I had. And I've been running since 1976, and I wanted to get to the Olympic trials for at least the marathon. And I was training heavily. I was doing 100 miles a week and working a full-time job. And it was BC, before children. And one day I was out running, and I was getting ready for my second real attempt at qualifying for the Olympic marathon trials. And it was 1991. And while I was out running, and I had a bad feeling. I woke up late and I said, I'm only going to get, 5-6 miles in this morning, but I'll go to the track and I'll do, I forgot that my coach was away. I was going to go to the track, meet him down in Montclair. So that morning I got up, I don't know, probably it was like 5:20, 5:15 in the morning, or a little bit later actually. And I didn't get out until before 6. And it was a beautiful August day. It's a beautiful August day. And at about 2 miles, I saw a guy looking at me. And he was parked in this parking lot in front of this catering restaurant, fancy schmancy place. And it's very residential. So I see him and I get the willies. I got to chill up my spine. Something tells me something's really wrong. So I figured, let me cross the road. I always ran against the traffic, but that side didn't have enough houses on it. So I crossed the road, went to the side where there was a lot of houses. So if he were to come after me, I could run up to one of the doors and start banging on it and somebody would answer. And again, I didn't have any training at all, aside for being in the Marines in the early 80s. But we were trained mostly in hand grenades and M16A1s and booby trap stuff and all that. We weren't trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu like they do now. I think that's part of boot camp now. It's more hand-to-hand stuff. So once I felt kind of safe, I saw he wasn't following me, but there was a street behind, which, I totally forgot about, that he could have looped around another street and met up with me. So I get about a half mile from there, and I got a bad feeling, and my body was forced to turn around. My body literally wanted to turn around. But I said to myself, it's only going to be 5 miles. Come on, get 16 in. You'll do 10 tonight, do 6 now. And 3 times I turned around. How weird, right? And finally, because I'm so stubborn and I am incredibly strong-willed, I forged ahead towards my 3-mile turnaround for the 6-mile run. And as I got there, the way the bend is, and it gets very wooded. And across the way was a reservoir and wooded area and a broken fence and so. So anyway, long story short, this guy comes out of nowhere. He had parked his car up the road and come and hid by the fence across the road. And it happened so fast. I went to turn around at the county sign, and there he was. And one of the 7 questions a criminal will ask you, which, Gerry, you will know some of this, is, do you know what time it is? Or do you know where such and such is? Right? Like that. So he asked me where Patterson was. And I was so startled that it literally, the question, just him coming out of nowhere, because the way the sun came, is I went, it's that way. And as I took my right hand and he grabbed me so fast. And he was a little over 6 foot, and he was about 260, 265. And he pulled me in so fast that I knew that if his hand came anywhere near my mouth, I was going to bite him. That was my first thought. My next thought was to yell fire. I learned that because I studied with police officers for 4 years when I was a kid. Every 2 weeks, I was at a police station studying. And troopers actually taught me that when I was 16 or 15. I think I was 16. And that's what they taught me in 10 days. I learned so much. And that was one of the things I never forgot was don't ever yell help, always yell fire. And just keep yelling fire. And I did. And that's a whole story itself. People heard me. They didn't want to get involved. That's why I didn't get rescued. So we fought in the middle of the road. And he slammed my head into the pavement 7 times. And I got up every single time because I thought, no way in hell am I losing to somebody who's out of shape. And so basically that whole thing, and he broke my back. I had jaw damage. I lost 2 teeth eventually. I had head and neck damage for I don't know how long. It was like months. Had a tough time turning my head. And I got away. He was going to kill me, and I talked him out of it. And he raped me like twice. So he got me into the woods across the way, but I was smart with how I ran because it took some doing to get me in that woods. I kept fighting until I realized I was so concussive that I thought, well, if I'm going to die, I may as well see myself die, and that's just how I felt. So after that, right before the trial, we found out my back was broken and it'd been 18 months. I was misdiagnosed 6 times because they didn't think I should have survived. The doctors were silly with their lack of diagnostics. They told me that rape was only sex. So, which they never listened to anything. Yeah.
Wow.
So I got properly diagnosed by a doctor who was a runner who happened to be following the case. It was front page news and a lot of newspapers for, I don't know, over the course of 18, 20 months. Went to trial. I won. And they said I wasn't going to win. And I thought the guy was going away for 30 years. Well, as many may know, they get out. He got out 15 years early. And we were in the middle because it changed. I could no longer have my own children because of what he did. I had to change my job, and I was in the middle of putting my husband through college. And I was in a lot of pain because of my back. Even post-operatively, I was in and out of rehab for 10 years for my back. So they let him out early. They violated my rights as a victim. The parole board did. And I realized that I was his number one target because he had been arrested 7 times before me. And then I went and called up Phil Dunlap, who happened to be at the time a client of mine, because I became a therapist. I left my financial job because of my back. And
became a physical therapist, right?
And I became a massage therapist who worked with pain patients. So I dealt with people who couldn't be cured with surgery, drugs, cortisone shots. I worked on professional athletes, but I worked on a lot of people who'd really been through horrific stuff. And I could really relate because I came from nothing as a child and there was domestic violence there. So there's a few times in my life where I've been really close to buying the farm, so to speak. And that wasn't even like
And you
twice
ended
using the
up
Marines.
going
So
to Phil for martial arts training,
I
and
went to
Phil,
Phil.
mixed martial arts instructor,
And
gym
then
in
my
his
husband,
basement.
after a few months, said, Phil just trains fighters. And I went, yeah. And he goes, you're in there with all these men and you get beat up and you come back and you're okay with it. And I said, yeah, but the guy's not in jail again and he's not dead yet. He's out. He's 6 miles from us. So by the grace of God, after 8.5 months of doing 3 times a week with Phil, what ended up happening was finally the guy out of the blue, because he was like, we're almost the same age, drops dead. They find him dead in his bed. And that's how I become normal. My husband is begging
That's
me to
a
fight.
great
So-
into that story.
And I loved Muhammad Ali. I followed boxing from the time I was 4 years old. So I loved fighting. My husband was like not into watching that stuff. And I was the one that was watching it.
Yeah, I know because helped corner you in a couple of fights, and I never saw your husband in any of those.
You never saw him. He loved it, but he was afraid for me.
Yeah.
But he pushed me into it. He begged me. And then finally, when I said, okay, I'm going to do it, I said, but you've got to accept the fact that I'm going to come home with a broken nose and you just have to deal with it. I could put makeup on when I go and be a therapist and go out to eat with you.
Right.
But hey,
Now, I'll toss this out there for all of you or both of you. Do you think most women get involved in martial arts looking specifically for self-defense training? Or is there a wide variety of reasons like there are with men, many of whom are just looking for some exercise or maybe to get into competition or just because they saw it on TV and thought it looked cool? Do women do it primarily, in your experience, just for self-defense? Gerry, what do you think?
So I did an autoethnography for the Martial Arts Study Conference in Wales a few years ago. And I did a lot of research on post-assault training. And then, and there was a difference. There's not a lot of information done with women who opt to train after such an episode. So you have to ask women, why are you training? Do you know of someone? Is it something you're trying to avoid becoming, heaven forbid, a victim? Or are you training after the fact because you're motivated to find ways to take care of yourself? It is my opinion that most women train in avoidance. They would not like to become a victim. Women who have been victims, if you don't handle them properly, they leave because you trigger the episode in such a way that they're not prepared to handle. So it's always become a good practice to talk with women, to find out how you can help them, to let them know that they retain autonomy over their body, even though they are in your school or your class. I make it a point to encourage women to say, hey, listen, if we do something today that makes you feel uncomfortable, by all means, you can wait until you see yourself able to participate. In another segment, no one will ask you any questions. No one will say anything to you, to say, hey, why aren't you in? None of that kind of thing. You join us whenever you feel like joining us. You stand back whenever you need to stand back. No politics here. And I say that because I have very clear recollection of trauma while I was training. And my teacher observed my hands shaking. And he was like, are you okay? And I was like, yes, sir, Professor Duncan. He's like, he says, do you feel safe here? I was like, yes, sir, I do. He's like, you got to do something about that. He says, your hands are shaking. And I didn't realize from trauma, that once you start discussing violence, and all of my training, probably the first 2 years, I shook with Professor Duncan of probably the first 2 years, just out of fear, trauma, remembering. And then he taught me how to see feeling vulnerable as equal opportunity, because he's like, for as much as he knows about you, you know about him. And then, now my thinking, begins to go from maybe 180 to now 360. I'm like, okay, that is true. That is very true. And I had an instructor, his name is Shihan Erskine, who did all of my portraits of Lady Sensei in uniform. And we were practicing a rear naked choke. And he caught me under my throat and he bumped his hip. And my feet dangled about 10 or 12 inches off the floor. And I started freaking out, just from remembering, if you will. And it was that moment and the ones thereafter, but I wouldn't verbalize how it made me feel. I was really suffering in silence. And I realized, I called it the swell. The moment that you realize that the person you're dealing with, or in this confrontation, you realize the strength and you feel diminished by the expansion. And I was like, oh my God. And it made me freeze. And I learned, and I began to teach subsequently, that you must learn how to fight through the swell. When you feel the power of the other individual, when you feel the strength, like, don't let that stop you. And over the years, I had to learn how to fight through the swell, Now I'm not preoccupied with feeling your power, feeling you swell up, feeling the power, because I'm going to shut it down. I understand that now.
Right. So
But it's made me very sensitive about
so
teaching women.
it does seem then that the majority of women get involved in martial arts more for self-defense purposes
For
than the
that
average
and
man.
to avoid something that they saw
Right.
on the news or that happened to a friend or a family member. That's just, it's not scientifically backed up, but from my years, I would say women train to avoid negative outcomes and
Is
to be
it
able to defend themselves.
is that also your experience, Jody?
Actually not, but I'm going to tell you why.
Hmm.
Okay. You're in Brooklyn. I'm in residential Bergen County. And I'm going to say the thinking in my area is if I don't address it, it won't happen to me. Okay.
Mm,
All
mm.
right. Isn't that terrible?
No, yeah,
Okay. So I just noticed
true.
this because, to me, it's a suburban way of thinking. That's what I think.
It is.
Okay. And then the other real reason why women do martial arts that I know about is it is not even about crime a lot of times. It's
Bless their
about I'm going to get
hearts.
in shape. I think I'm a fighter. And that's okay to get in shape and want to be a fighter. But they don't really want to think about the nasty, like Phil always said that I was very rare. I was rare because I was willing to do things that the men weren't even willing to do. Really
Mm.
horrible
I
things.
can attest to that. You
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 can
were
attest to that. So it's a personality thing. That's what I think.
Yes.
But in my neck of the woods, in the surrounding 9, 10, 11 towns, the suburban women I find go to martial arts because their friends are doing it and will have fun. It's social. It's,
I
I hate
couldn't
to
agree
say it
with
like
you
that.
more. That
You know
is
what I
a
mean? Like,
fact.
and then secondary might be self-defense. Oh, Susie, it'll be so great for you because, whatever, right?
Yes.
And I always looked at it like self-defense, even before this happened to me.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And part of it was I was bullied as a kid. My brother was bullied. I used to defend my older brother because he was tiny. My mother always said, "You are your brother's keeper." And I made sure if
Wow.
somebody touched
Really
him, my hands
interesting.
were on them like you couldn't have believed. I mean, like I was like, boom. So I could say to me, I love to roll, okay, for a few reasons. I only rolled once last year. And when my husband got sick, I gave up everything but my job, taking care of the kids, and going out for runs, staying in good shape and hitting the bag, right?
Right.
Because also COVID came right as the time he had gotten terminal. So I miss the contact. And Phil always said that about me because you're somebody that you miss physical contact.
Mhm.
And I knew because now I was a widow that if it was to go back, I would have to do a very tame rolling and not get hit in the face anymore, even though it never really bothered me. I didn't care. Phil always said, "You don't care." I said, "I don't care." But I rolled once last year and it was so much fun. And I did it for fun. Like in other words, because I'm a very physical person. I just am. And so for me, self-defense now, yeah. But for me, it's also, it's something I've got it. It's something in me,
Yeah.
and it's
I,
like,
I
Yeah.
think
I feel good about it.
that's kind of a maturation process
It's
for
like,
everybody, men and women in martial arts, that maybe you get
yeah,
into it for a certain reason, like self-defense,
right.
but eventually you do it just for the pure love of doing it.
It's
Uh,
just like, it feels good. I feel alive.
yeah. So it's my impression now that there are still far more men training in martial arts than women. Do you all feel that perception is accurate? And if so, why do we not see more women training, particularly if self-defense is a concern for a lot of women? And at least in theory, martial arts is supposed to be an effective form of self-defense. What's going on here that more women aren't training, at least from what I've seen?
Oh, I think there are 3 or 4 M's. There's men, money, and management challenges that women face. Women are the nurturers, and particularly those with families, they are not able to clone themselves into enough people to care for themselves. And so they're the caregivers, if you will. They run the family economics and corporations of home, you see, and it's very difficult for women to be able, first of all, to live guilt-free and say, this is my time, right? Just for me. And so women leave the martial arts, even if they start as girls, you know, they leave the martial arts. Sometimes the men in their lives don't want them to be that close to other men, to be physical with any men, or as Jody put it, you know, sometimes husbands and boyfriends don't want to see another guy, you know, so close, because we have to be very intimately close to train. And for some, it's just a little too visually stimulating to see your wife or your girlfriend involved in such activities. But I think mostly as caregivers, we don't give ourselves permission and time to do things just for ourselves. And perhaps if you don't train and make time for yourself, perhaps by 40, perhaps you're probably going to be more greatly negatively impacted, you know, that your training is not going to resume. Because that 40 to 50 window right there, if you're not taking care of the house, taking care of the kids, you know, you're volunteering at church, you volunteer in the community, everything except yourself. And martial arts is a time for a lot of introspection.
Well, do you think, Jody, do you think that in your experience, are a lot of women just too uncomfortable or intimidated walking into a martial arts school, that they just don't want to deal with that, even if they might be interested in some kind of self-defense training?
Again, I'm going to say this. It's not going to happen to them. Okay. That's one of the things. And she's right. Gerry, you're right about the male thing, about women feeling funny. I had one go, but they're sweating on you. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
that's part of, you know, like any sport, you're going to sweat. You know, I never thought about it. I guess because I was so motivated. All right. My husband didn't mind. He saw me rolling into my basement. Remember that, Mark? You roll my basement on Wednesday nights. Peter, Norman C. Peter and Big Tom Pluck, who weighed 278, in my basement rolling with me, or Steve. And Norm would just laugh, you know, and my daughters would come down and my oldest would analyze it because she's very analytical. And my youngest would go, whose feet are those? You know, like, because we were rolling on the ground. And, you know, when you're doing jujitsu, you know, you're all over the place, right? So it was more kind of like funny and odd. And very rarely did he ever even speak out of any kind of feeling offensive. But I'm going to tell you who was offended. And Phil said this to me one day when I said, what is the problem with the people on either side of my family, which I don't have many members of my side of family, it's really his, and the people are supposed to be my friends. He goes, I'm going to tell you, because they didn't think they could bring themselves to do what you're doing. And what you did when something bad happened to you, he said, you wiped yourself off, you moved forward, you went through whatever you had to go through, and you kept plugging along, and you're doing all of this.
Absolutely.
And I said, but doesn't everybody do that? And he goes, they don't think they can. And I'm going to tell you why they don't think they can, because they've been told. I watched my mother go through what she went through, and I realized I didn't have all her physical ailments. I had a great husband, and I said, I am not in that position, and I will be different. I will progress. I will be more forward in my life. And I didn't go into this. I was, how old when he was released? It was 2008. So I got involved at 46 and a half and then competing
hmm
because he died right before I was turned 46 and a half.
Wow.
So I went very late. And my first MMA fight was right before my 48th birthday. And my first professional MMA fight was before my 51st birthday. And
Mhm.
my last fight was right before my 54th birthday. And that was a boxing match. And I
Well,
love it.
you are so beautiful, Jody. I
And
can't.
it's really the naysayers. It's really the women that wrinkle their nose up at you in your town. That's what I got. Oh, but you're so pretty. Why do you want to have a bruise on your face? I'm like, what in the world is wrong with you? So my
Mhm.
makeup rubbed off. I mean, like, come on already.
Well,
Uh,
I would say you are both a little unusual in
that's
that
it, Phil. Yeah. Yeah.
you know have both been willing to make sacrifices and do things that a
Yeah,
lot
like
of
Gerry,
not
you
men
moved.
and women
Yeah.
aren't willing
Well,
to do. But as far as women go, do you think martial arts schools in general do enough to attract female students? Do
I
they
do not.
not market themselves properly? Do they
No,
not cater to the specific
No.
needs or interests of
no,
women? No.
No.
no, nor are they educated enough
Mhm.
Correct. That's correct. Yeah,
to do
that's
that.
absolutely correct. They're
Yeah.
not feeling uh like I've walked into dojos and I always feel like a mouse. I have to be somewhere a long time to not feel like a mouse because to me, everybody is just so much more educated than I am. I always think that, even if I've been fighting and nobody else has been fighting, I still feel that way. I feel like such a fetus in the land of martial arts because I know people who've done incredible things that is just mind blowing. And when they tell me they feel like a child in it and they've been doing it all of their life and they're 52, it's just like, oh my gosh. But I don't hear it really as much from men, except for you're the exception, Gerry. And I just talked to my daughter's retired sensei, who's I think she's 68 now and just stopped teaching in 2018
Mm.
and moved with her husband. They had a dojo and they really ran the ship well. But that dojo was an exception. You go to boxing gyms, I've been in boxing gyms, all right? Women will not feel welcomed in any boxing gym I've ever been in. I'm just going to be straight up.
Yes.
And you will see people of color there, but if you're a guy, you're accepted. If you're a girl, it's a gender thing. And I think also a lot of times, and Mark, you and I had that discussion about, what was it like last week or earlier this week? I can't remember. And we were talking about how um, there's an intimidation, there's like an ego thing that goes on sometimes with certain dojos or boxing gyms or fight gyms that women can easily be turned off by. I don't know what the uh, thing is, but it's almost like the men who are running the ship are overly projecting their masculinity, like they have to sell it to us, and they don't have to do that,
Yeah, there's
Right.
certainly a large element of machismo involved with most men in martial arts, and it's traditionally a male-oriented type of pursuit. But I know both of you have taught women's only classes, and I wanted to bring that up. Now, I'll admit I have very mixed feelings about those classes because, on the one hand, I understand some women may be too uncomfortable to walk into a gym filled with guys and start training with them, particularly if they've had negative experiences with men in their personal lives. And as a way to get more women involved in training, I can certainly see the benefits of women-only classes, but I also think women who are interested in self-defense really need to train with men because, let's face it, women are generally not looking to defend themselves against other women. They're looking to defend themselves against male attackers. So I'm not sure they're really getting the full physical self-defense benefits of training only with other females. Well, what are your thoughts on this, Gerry? I'll start with you.
So I'm thinking that with women, my experience is when a woman comes walking in, I'm always curious about her background, about her kinetic background. I always want to know, did you play any sports? Were you a dancer? Whether you have some established kinetic relationship to space and time. And then I want to know, have you ever had someone be very aggressive where you felt powerless, to do something about it? Or would you like to avoid that? So those are the things that when I speak with women, that I try to ascertain. But for me, when I went to the Staten Island VAJ dojo, I don't want to say wasn't welcome, but it was a boys' club. And the difference was that I had been a childhood friend of Professor Scott at that time. And at the time, I'm training with Professor Duncan, but Professor Duncan is too advanced in age to do ukemi work with me, to roll on the floor with me and such. So I went to VAJ so that I could get that classroom component, socialization, learn to work on the floor. And the guys really weren't trying to feel me. They were like, get her out of here, because I was like, you guys actually stink. Do you ever wash your uniforms?
Oh, man.
And everybody was like, you, get away from you, stink. You're like, who is she? We put our uniforms in the bag. We go home, they stay in the bag, and then we put them back on. I'm like, oh my God, this place is really funky right now. So, but no, I don't think schools do enough to make women feel welcome. I think it's too pedagogical. People talk to women like they're children, and women have lived experiences, have life under their belt, and I don't think a lot of schools make the transition well from children to adults.
Mm-hmm.
And today, you can't bark military commands at women, to say, oh, well, this is the discipline. You don't know whether I need discipline or not. You don't know. You don't know who I am. In my case, I'm a member of a psychiatric emergency response team. What discipline are you going to teach me? I come to the table with experience and with a professional approach to self-defense and keeping others safe. So you shouldn't assume that you're going to teach me all of these things. I'm a customer. You need to find out how you can help me.
But are women's only classes a solution to that? Jody, what do you think? Because you've primarily trained with men. I
prefer training really with some women, but really I'm used to training with men mostly. And I think there's a big advantage to training with men. The good thing about training with women, as Gerry had said, was that how she interviews women and finds out, and see, a woman won't divulge, they're not going to respond the way I do. A woman will not divulge to a man maybe an assault. They'll feel funny about it. They really, really will. Mm-hmm. Right, Gerry? Yes, and that's where Gerry has she's made a few good points about that. Like, find out about this person. The men, it's almost like a man, I hate to say this, a man asking you, who is your instructor? When was the last time you had your mens? Okay. They look at it like so personal. Okay. When in essence, and it's really our society that does this. Okay. It's like the guys have to kind of like deliver the message. Find out if you're going to sign somebody up at your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu course here, right? And you're a guy, sit down. Somebody's got to sit down with them, male or female, and say, so what are you really in here for? They make you fill out a form and you sign your name and that's it. Okay. Because it's, hate to say, not all the time, but a lot of times it's about ka-ching. It's about the money. Mm-hmm. And I mean, they got to make money. I get it. They have an expertise. I totally get it. But I found a couple places where it wasn't about the money. All right. Which is really good. Out of like 6 places or 7 places I've been to, I would say there was like 2 or 3 that weren't about the money. Okay. One was the guy's still out there. He's one of my husband's friends in River Edge. It's Budokai Karate with Rick Rawman. He is, when it comes to karate, he is the creme de la creme. And I don't see an ego ever around him. He's been doing this since he's 65. He's probably been doing it since he was 15. Okay. And the other place I saw was at the Yes Boxing Gym in Dumont, New Jersey. Those guys are great. And then it was Phil. And everybody else, I kind of felt like could have been about the money. I'm not so sure, that kind of thing. But going back to the sensitivity, Gerry is correct about that. Whereas a woman will open up to me, or a husband. I remember I had a husband say to me in a supermarket, he saw me, go, my wife needs you. She's being stalked. And so I went to the house and I trained her privately without him around. It was just her and I. And I worked with her for an hour and a half to 2 hours. It was close to 2 hours. And she's a few years older than me, and we really had to tread very lightly. I could never see her walk into any kind of a gym or do group ever.
Absolutely.
Because she had never been raped, because I made sure of that. Okay, because I always knew her sensitivity, but I wanted to know why. And it was a daddy issue, yes. Okay, so we don't even think of that stuff, right?
Yes.
The ominous big family daddy issue kind of thing. But she was really being stalked. And the police department, even though she had written down every day she had been stalked and by these two guys, and she's a beautiful woman, but she's tiny. And one guy followed her from the park to a supermarket parking lot and approached her. And I'm like, that guy would have been on the ground if he did that to me. But she didn't even know to yell help. I mean, like she said, Jody, I was like a deer in headlights.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh my God, this is real bad. And the police were ignoring her. That's the other, Gerry, you must know that. They were ignoring her. This cute little blonde, it's a woman,
Yes.
And I've come across that personally, I would say 1, 2, 3, 4 times in my life. And here I was very friendly with police officers as a kid. And it really disgusted me. Okay.
It's hard because women
it's
have
really
to navigate
difficult.
systems.
And
Women,
it's the system, it's the society. It is, women don't always help women too. That's the other thing. I noticed my female relatives were so against me just trying to do self-defense.
but
Just
we came up at a time of, there were really very specific gender roles coming up in the 60s.
Correct.
And the 70s. And I was a tomboy.
Yeah.
Whatever that meant. I was a girl who played sports with the boy children.
Exactly. Right.
I was the peppermint patty of the Peanuts gang.
Do you see that as different now, Gerry? Has that changed more where it's now more socially acceptable for women to train? Yeah.
Yes, it's a lot more socially acceptable. I'm happier to see it. I'm happier to see women flourishing at sports. But I just wanted to double back to women teaching women, as with any industry or profession, it depends on what your goal is, right? I am not trying to preserve the martial arts for its sake. I am trying to help women with a tool that I've learned to use. And I've learned that with women, you can't come at women so directly physical. Right. You have to start psychologically with women and then transition into the physicalities of the martial arts. And there's a certain gentleness, there's a certain speed in your progression that you really have to be aware of with women when you're training women. And then I believe there comes a time where I can take the training wheels off, and now you're not going to get so easily rattled, after a certain amount of time. But women need training wheels, I believe, longer than she's going to get in most schools where men folk are the proprietors.
Is a good way to do this, maybe if women are uncomfortable training with men, to have a women's only class, but at some point as they become more experienced and comfortable to then encourage them to transition to
Oh,
an
of
open
course, of
class?
course.
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
want to simulate as many conditions as possible. I thank that instructor who, who shook me up and did the rear naked choke. I let him know how much I hated him as often as I can. But here's something though. We don't talk about how many men come to the martial arts for self-defense. That's the hidden curtain. Men don't always come because they want to work out. Men come to martial arts because they're scared as hell too.
Yeah.
But we never have that discussion. Guys have been robbed. Guys have had their backsides handed to them. Guys have been humiliated. Guys come to the martial arts with the same amount of frequency, with fear and trauma as women do, but we never talk about it. We always look up to them like they're the gods. And it's like, no, men have been hurt, robbed, beat, and all of those things, and they don't want it to happen again, but they're certainly not going to talk about it. You can forget it.
Given that, though, the average woman is going to be at a significant size and strength disadvantage if she's attacked by an average size man, do most schools make their training rigorous enough and hold their female students to a high enough standard for women to actually develop practical self-defense skills?
No, sir.
No?
And what I'll add to what Gerry was saying about men. My husband actually started karate because he was driving across the United States and met his friend from Utah, and they ended up getting beat up. They were traveling together in Coeur d'Alene, Iowa, because they talked to some girls at the bar, right? And the guys knew they were out of town. And when they went out to their car, they got both my husband and his friend Rick got beat up. And when Norm came back to New Jersey, he went and decided to do, that's what happened. And he loved the discipline of it, but it really was about self-defense. And when you were at Phil Dunlap's basement, I can tell you, enough of the guys now, which I put in one of the books I wrote, a third of the guys is what Peter had said. And I was like, yeah, isn't it like a third of the guys had a rap sheet that came in? A third of them were geeky like me and you, Peter, and you, Mark, right? Geeky people. and a third had a badge. They were behind the badge, or they were retired police officers or whatever. They were law enforcement. So we were all really honest with each other. The guys it was all men. The guys were very open with their fears, what they learned, the ones that had been in prison. I got to know a lot of them, very like intimately, like hearing their stories. They were not afraid to say something to me, but it was also like, I was like the den mother. My husband said, you always get guys talking all the time. And probably because I was who I was a tomboy. I was in the Marines. I was used to being around a lot of men. And I just knew kind of what not to say, when not to talk.
It also may be that men are just a little more willing to open up,
around
show their
men.
vulnerability. And I was going to say to women, there's again that machismo thing. A guy doesn't want to show weakness in front of another guy, whereas they might perceive women as more nurturing and be willing to express some things to them that they wouldn't express to these guys that they're fighting with in the gym.
Well, Phil did exactly what Gerry does, where she asks, which you think most people don't. Phil did that. Phil did that with people that came in. And I think that's why his common law wife, Lorraine, calls him the Pied Piper, because and that's what it is. If you really show an interest in the people that are walking into all right, Gerry, into your dojo, your gym, whatever, male or female, they will be more open and say, well, yeah, I got mugged on campus, that kind of thing. And they won't feel guilty. They'll feel a little guilt, but then Phil goes, oh, well, that sucks. Here, let's train you, So it's kind of like that, but very few.
Those people that you named, as you broke people off into thirds and some of their reasons.
Yeah.
What I would put on the table for you to consider is each one of those groups have probably experienced a loss of their power.
Oh, yeah.
And people want to regain
Yep.
their sense of autonomy, agency, and power
Yep.
when they come to get training in the martial arts. So I always say, you can't take a church woman and go to the corner and get a prostitute off the corner with a church woman. You need a reformed prostitute
Okay. Yeah.
who's now in the church to go out on the corner and say, I know your story. I've lived your story.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So first
Exactly.
people have to give you credit for
Mhm.
being an authority. So I can say to a woman, listen, I have had my backside handed to me.
Right.
Right? I'm a victim of domestic violence. So there's no pretense, there's no put on. I'm not selling you anything. I'm just saying I walked a mile in shoes similar to yours. And then people
Yeah.
give me credit when I can say, hey, felt that too.
And that's, you know
But
what?
people
That
have
is
to give you
correct.
credit for
Yeah.
being an authority on what you're
Yeah.
talking about. So sometimes subliminally, we're looking at people and go, oh my God, he or she doesn't even have a clue.
Yeah.
So,
And I think you hit the nail on the head with that. Big time, because what it made me think of was these guys looked at me not like I was a woman.
Mm-hmm.
They looked at me as someone that felt what they felt, disempowered, and that's what you pointed out.
Absolutely.
And they're looking for empowerment, but also they never want it to happen again, whatever it is. And like the cops that came in, and Phil used to tell me this, I said, is there a certain age that police officers come in like more so than not? He goes, and they start getting close to 40. And I go, why? And he said, because the guys that they're going to arrest are probably 22. I'm like,
Because they're young lions. They're young
oh,
lions.
right. That's what he said. And then I said, well,
Absolutely.
what about the other guys who, been in prison? He goes, well, this they can air it out, but also they've been victimized. And I found out from some of
Looking
them,
for
I
power.
found out like their father left, and the oldest of three boys who would end up in jail is now no longer in jail. And his whole story. I remember driving him down. I don't know if you remember Rashid,
mhm.
Mark, very talented. I remember driving him down to Virginia. And before that, I was driving him somewhere else. I can't remember. I drove him a few times, and we had these talks about how he wanted to get reacquainted with his dad. But I remember there was a lot of trauma there.
Mm.
And I had it with another guy. I drove from Manhattan in the middle of the night. It was like 1:30 in the morning. His ride had left without him. They were being jerks. And I texted my husband. I said, I'm driving somebody. I'm going to be home like 2 or 3 hours late. I won't get home till 4:30 a.m. I was at the fights in Manhattan. Was it Manhattan or the Bronx? No, I was in Manhattan. Manhattan proper. I had a fight there. And I drove the kid from Manhattan to Connecticut and back to my house and made sure the kid got home. And he was, 33 years old, one of Phil's fighters who was sick and couldn't fight that night. And I said, you came for me. I'm going to drive you home.
Bless you.
He was like and I looked at him like they were, I hate to say this, kind of like my sons. I never had a son. I have daughters. And so I looked at it like, mi casa su casa, like whatever you're going through, I some way and somehow can relate. You're not a bad
Mhm.
person
But
because,
they can
you
feel
did
your
drugs.
empathy, though. They can feel
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
You
that's what I
understand?
was saying. I think
Yeah.
sometimes it's easier for men. They sense that empathy or nurturing side of women more
Absolutely.
Yeah.
than they would
Yeah.
with other
They
men.
feel
But
safe.
It
uh,
feels safe, and it's not wussy. It's just,
mhm.
it's just proper.
No,
I
So
they
think
feel
that's what I
safe
call it.
in
Yeah.
trusting you
Hmm.
with something that's paining them or something that they feel
yeah.
inadequate about
Yeah.
or, some sort of trauma. Like
Yep.
people can feel you.
So
You understand?
finally, any advice for women thinking about doing martial arts or for instructors looking to attract more female students to their school or just retain the ones they already have? What are your thoughts on that, Jerry?
So there's nothing I've done in my life that I couldn't see myself doing first. And I know the Women's Network believes that our voices, our images, and our stories are going to be what
Mhm.
propels young women and
Right.
girls into the next generation of practitioners. You have to be able to see yourself, you see. So
Hmm.
little girls look at women like Jody and I and say, oh my God, I want to be just. It's
And,
exciting, particularly someone such as myself. I didn't grow up seeing, first of all, women as a general idea as practitioners, and then brown women to look like me and for me to embrace as a shero.
mhm. Yeah, certainly role models are great to have.
Absolutely.
Jody, what do you think? Any final advice for women?
Yeah,
Um,
I would say that, first of all, to do self-defense is extremely empowering, and it's best to do it before anything happens.
mhm,
But if
Absolutely.
something happens and then you think to do it, well, then by all means, find a friendly place. And if they don't ask the right questions, like Gerry pointed out, if they are not concerned with what actually brought you into that gym, then maybe that's not the place to go. All right.
Mm,
And it doesn't matter whether it's a guy or a gal who are running the ship at that point. If they are not interested in why you're really there, like if it's just a form, I'm sorry.
mhm.
You're not going to get my $160 a month, or
Mhm.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
But the other thing I will tell you is that I have trained men. So I've trained boys and men, and they were receptive. And only when I've been instructed, here, Jody, go hold pads for so and so, and I want you to train this person to come in, da 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 da. And I would do only what I knew. That's what it was.
Hmm.
I wasn't going to fake you.
Hmm.
Okay. That's the other question. Women have to come in and really say, is this guy going to show me what he actually knows, or she actually knows, or are
Hmm.
they going to fake me?
Yeah.
Right.
you
Okay.
should ideally be able to share filters with people.
Yeah.
And even if you're the proprietor, you don't have to know it all, but you should have a sensei
Yeah.
that knows
Yeah.
something about
That's
it.
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
And,
So
and
to wrap this up here, sorry to cut you off. We're running out of
okay.
some time, but what do each of you have coming up in the future that you'd like to let listeners know about, or is there a way they can learn more about you or contact you, Gerry?
So the Women's Martial Arts Network is celebrating its 7th anniversary, and we have a short film coming out on Saturday, November the 9th, 2024, at the Urban Action Showcase, which is going to happen in Times Square at the Regal Times Square Theaters at 247 West 42nd Street.
Hmm.
And we're going to screen our film of our 7th anniversary celebration, where the women came to the park and everyone was doing their katas and self-defense and demos and such. And so we edited 2 hours down into about 15 minutes.
Hmm.
And you can find out more about that at ladysensei.com, LADYSENSEI.com, ladysensei.com. We're going to have a screening, panel discussion, and there'll be a few demos for some of the women who feel so inclined, because
Right.
we know that our voices, our images, and our stories will influence the next generation to step forward.
And Jody, what about you?
Well, I closed my therapy business, and I've been writing, and I'm working re-editing two more crime books that's part of a series, and it's based on fact, but it's based on truth. But then you have your way when it's fiction, you have your way of making
Hmm.
it. And I'm on Medium. I have my own blog, and I have a Medium blog, and I am on Facebook. And I'm easy to find. Just look for Jody-Lynn Rain Man Reicher. It's easy to find, or just Jody-Lynn Reicher. And I I want to get back into rolling again, but right now I have to focus on my kids. I have three elderly pets, Mark. They're still alive. We haven't eaten them yet. And I'm trying to get my arms back into shape. I mean, I've been running 70 miles a week, and I'm putting in about, trying to put in 90 to 100 miles a week between the hiking, mostly running, but hiking and walking added
Right.
in and stuff like that.
We will
So,
put links to all your sites down in the show notes. I want to thank you both for coming on here. It's been a great discussion. Thank you. One more time, thanks to both my guests for coming on today. You can find links to their websites down in the show notes. You can also find a link to the website of Eleanor Academia, who provided the music for the show and was going to be our third guest today, but unfortunately could not make it. But you can still find the link to her site as well as a link to my own site down below. That wraps it up for this episode. Until next time, thank you for listening and keep punching.